Yo, welcome back to another Craftopia guide. Now I've been getting all kinds of messages, tweets, people coming into my live stream asking how to stop the game from crashing. So in this guide, we are going to be looking at the best settings for console to prevent crashing. Now before we get started, if this guide does help you, please do drop a like and subscribe. I make all kinds of guides and content within Craftopia, and I have plenty more on the way. But let's do this. Okay, now it's no secret that this game doesn't run the best on console currently. But there is a couple of things that you can do that will really help with performance. Now, of course, there is a range of different Xboxes out there. You have the original chunky Xbox One, you have the Xbox One X, you have the Xbox Series S, and the Xbox Series X. So that does mean, depending on what console you have, will depend on how many of these settings you need to do. For example, if you're on an Xbox Series X, you probably only need to do one or two things. If you're on the original Xbox One, you're probably going to need to do them all. So what I would recommend doing is doing a couple, seeing how it runs, do a couple more. You get what I mean. So start off by heading into your settings. Now I play this game on both console and PC. And when I'm on console, I personally play on the Xbox One X. Now, before we make any changes, I am not saying that making all of these changes will make your game run smooth. The game just isn't completely optimized for console yet. However, in the next 2 weeks, we are having an update drop that will really help with optimization. So until then, we're just doing what we can. Now, the first thing you may notice when you go into your settings, you have a bunch of settings, usually what's considered PC settings. Console don't usually get this kind of range. But with the problems we're having now, this is perfect. So I've gone ahead and I've reset my settings back to default, so we can start from scratch. Now, the first thing you're going to want to make sure is checked is the full screen mode. This won't do anything drastic, but due to no FPS counter, we can't tell if this makes a huge difference or not. But usually on a PC, when a game is set to full screen, that's the main priority. So this has a high chance of potentially carrying over to console. One thing we do know is it doesn't affect performance negatively. We're just not sure if it does much good either. So let's just check it to be on the safe side. Next we have resolution. Now this is default set to 720p. You're going to want to up that to 1080p. However, if you were on the original chunky Xbox, you could bring this back down to 720p, but I would recommend putting it 1080 for now and seeing how the game runs once we finish these settings. Next up, we have texture quality. Now this is default on standard. On a newer gen console, you could probably leave it there, but on an older generation, you're probably going to want to bump this down to the lower quality. Next is motion blur. Now, motion blur won't affect performance, but this should be a setting you disable in every game anyway, but it does come preset disabled, leave as is. Now next we have anti-aliasing. Now this is probably one of the biggest changes you can make. Go ahead and disable that. You should drastically see a rise in frames per second, especially on those newer gen consoles. At this point, I would recommend closing down your settings and seeing how the game's running. If you are still encountering problems, or it's just not running smooth at all, then continue to make these changes. Now I'm going to skip a couple of settings here because they are the drastic changes we will make at the end, primarily for those older generation consoles. Now one of these settings here is camera offset. Now this is preference. It won't affect your performance at all. However, FOV does affect your performance, but it doesn't say so in the settings. I would personally leave this at 56. And adjust camera offset if you want to see more of the screen. This way, you're getting the range of the screen without changing any performance. Next up, we have LOD bias. This is basically a setting that changes the distance it takes to start rendering some of the items into the game. Now, this is another one that you can tweak as you start to add more things into the game. Now, I would go ahead and drop this down to 1. This doesn't make a lot of difference when it comes to how you play the game. It just means if you've got a lot of building going on, then it may not load the entire base, which will help with performance a lot. Next up, we have render distance. Now this is another key setting to change, and I would personally drop this down to around 2000. Again, you're not actually going to notice a lot of difference when it comes to gameplay, but it will help your performance a lot. You could even go lower if you're still having problems. You could potentially go all the way down to 1000, maybe even 500. Next up, we're going to do something a little bit different here. We're going to drop the shadow resolution down to 2048. We're going to bring the shadow render distance down to 80. and we are going to disable post-processing and HDR. Now your performance should be a lot better now. However, if you're still getting a little bit of problems, just disable shadows altogether. Now if you're on a newer gen console, it should be running a lot better now. However, if you're on that older gen and it's still struggling, here's a couple of other drastic steps that you could take, such as disabling bending grass and disabling the footprints. Now, if you don't particularly care about visuals and you purely want that performance, do all of these steps and your game will run smooth. But this game is built for PC, so the fact even newer gen consoles are struggling just shows some of the steps that you might need to take if you're on an older gen. It also depends on the amount of builds you have going on. For example, here you can see I've got this automated battery farm. Now this is constantly running, so you know, this along with other automated systems, a bunch of builds, a bunch of chests, maybe a breeder creating some sort of training room, the game will slow down. So while on console, another tip I would recommend is maybe separating your builds to different worlds. Have one base where you do all your furnace work. Have another base where you go and chill out to gather some batteries. Until we get these better optimizations, consoles are going to struggle. But with these steps, hopefully the game's running better for you now and you can enjoy the game that little bit more. I really hope this guide helped you. Again, if it did, please do drop a like and subscribe. I make all kinds of Craftopia content and I have way more coming. If you're still having any problems, let me know down in the comments below and I will do my best to help you. Or feel free to swing by the live stream. I live stream right here on YouTube. But I hope you have a great day, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace!